Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Um, my name is Jesse, and my pronouns are he, him, his. Um, I'm a white man with long, curly brown hair, wearing thick black rimmed glasses, a red, black, and white um, checkered shirt, and behind me are some bookcases full of books. And this is Healing Arts, which is a virtual event series focused on the intersections between the arts, health, and activism. Today we're joined by Margarita Saona, who's going to share some poetry and lead us in a workshop on writing through the languages and experiences of illness. Margarita's most recent bilingual collection of poetry, titled Corazón de Hojalata, or Tin Heart, explores her own experience as a heart transplant recipient. And it also investigates the relationship between medical and poetic language. I think this can be seen particularly well in the first poem, titled El Corazón de la Poesía, or The Heart of Poetry. And I wanted to share the first few lines with you from that poem, first in the original Spanish and then in the English translation. So, El corazón de la poesía. El corazón de la poesía, incluso de la mía, no es casi nunca el corazón, el verdadero, el órgano que mueve la sangre, el órgano con ventrículos y arterias. El corazón de la poesía es una metáfora, aunque tal vez sea metonomía, un símbolo, un desplazamiento, un tropo, que mueve la palabra músculo del puro cuerpo hacia el reino de los sentimientos. The heart of poetry, my own included, is almost never the heart, the true one, the organ that moves blood through its ventricles and arteries. The heart of poetry is a metaphor, though perhaps it's a metonymy, a symbol, a displacement, a trope that moves the muscle word from the pure body to the realm of feelings. So in this opening poem, Margarita reflects on how, when referenced in poetry, the heart is often disembodied. Uh, Instead of referring to a biological organ, it's used as a metaphor for abstract feelings like love. Margarita shuttles back and forth between writing in English, the lingua franca of the US hospital, and her mother tongue of Spanish. And she shuttles back and forth between the medical language, that is the lingua franca of the hospital, and her own lyric reflections. But in Margarita's poems, these two ways of talking about hearts are brought back into relation. She shuttles between the physical and the abstract, the medical and the poetic, allowing these two senses to interrupt one another and disrupt cliches. I think this comes through especially clearly in poems from the collection that reflect upon the heart which is transplanted into her body, a physical organ which used to be in another person's body, a person who had to die so that she could live. But this is not just a physical exchange. This person who is loved, donating a heart so that she can continue to love, is itself a relation of love. We have translation and transplantation, words about relationships created across divides. I think it's useful to note that metaphor too comes from the ancient Greek word meaning transport or transfer. And this, I think, points to one of the important ways that poetry can be valuably thought in relation to medicine. By shuttling between vocabularies and bringing them into productive relation, literature can contrast, incorporate, respond to, and process not only experiences of illness, but the languages through which those experiences are lived and navigated. Margarita is going to be sharing with us some poetry that demonstrates this and leading us through some writing prompts that allow us to try it for ourselves. So I want to say just a little bit more about Margarita before I turn things over to her. So Margarita Saona teaches Latin American literature and culture at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She studied linguistics and literature at Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú and received a PhD in Latin American literature from Columbia University in New York. She's interested in issues of memory, cognition, empathy, and representation in literature and the arts. She's published numerous articles, 2 books on literary and cultural criticism, Novelas Familiares, Figuraciones de la Nación en la Novela Latinoamericana Contemporánea, and Memory Matters in Transitional Peru. 2 books of short fiction, Como Horas, and Objeto Perdido, and a book of poems, which I was reading from, Corazón de la Hojalata. She's currently working on 2 books, one entitled Despadre, La masculinidad y la crisis de la identidad en la cultura peruana, which examines the way representations of men in Peruvian literature and film reveal deep fractures in the country's imaginary, and another one related to our session today entitled Vital Signs on the literary genres of infirmity. This series, I just want to mention, is currently operating without institutional funding, meaning that Margarita has volunteered her time to be with us today and to lead us through this session. So if you're able, I'd ask that you please consider purchasing a copy of her book, and I'll share a link to where you can do that in the chat. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Margarita.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor for me. I've attended some other sessions, and I think that the community that you're getting together is wonderful. And it's a great opportunity to reflect on issues that I think affect everybody. I was asked to describe myself. I'm a middle-aged, light-skinned Peruvian woman. I used to have very short hair, but due to the pandemic, it's now kind of middle length and without shape. It's a brown grayish color. I am wearing a blue shirt and a blue printed scarf and a tan cardigan. And I'm in a room that has many windows. Its walls are green and it has plants and books in it. I want to just tell my story really briefly because I want to move on to really talking about writing and what I think I want to tell you how I started writing, right? In this topic, right? I think I've written all my life different, not one thing, not what kind of text, but just little things here and there, and then the more academic work. But I thought I was a healthy 50-year-old woman. I was very active. I had been training in karate for about 10 years, but then had a second-degree black belt. But in the previous year, I had been experiencing weird symptoms. I thought it was menopause because some of them were clearly things like hot flashes. But I also was having very strong heartburn, couldn't sleep, I was gaining weight. I was out of breath often. I had not even noticed that, but one of my sisters noticed when I was visiting Lima in June of 2015 that I would pause a lot while I was talking to take some air. And all of a sudden I was traveling in a conference and I got really, really sick and I did not want to, I didn't know what to do. The symptoms were excruciating, but not clearly identifiable for me at that time as connected to the heart. I looked things up on the internet, kind of out of the corner of my eye, I saw heart failure, but I didn't really want to look at it. And somehow I survived and made it back home. but went immediately to my doctor, who sent me to the emergency room, and they told me I had had a heart attack or several heart attacks. And from then on, it was a whole journey in which I first had um, mitral valve replacement. The surgeon thought that replacing that would fix the problem, but my heart was already in too bad of a shape. The heart failure was too severe. And so they sent me home with a defibrillator, an external defibrillator, and they were considering installing one, but I started little by little getting better. Then a few months later, when I was not wearing the defibrillator anymore and I thought I was out of the woods, I had this massive atrial fibrillation, and I ended up for the hospital in 2 months, and my heart was simply not working anymore. They had to give me 2 pumps, ventricular assist devices. Normally people get just a left one. I got a left one and a right one. And I lived for 7 months wearing this until I received the heart transplant. So when all this started, after my first hospitalization, when I came back from the conference, I wanted to let people know what was going on. And I started using a platform that is called Caring Bridge. And it was just a form to letting my family and friends over the world know what was going on. And a lot of people have asked me why I wrote about that so publicly. And so part of what I'm going to present today has to do with these 5 years of reflections of why and how I write, right? And so it had a practical aspect to it, right? Just information for my family. But I little by little I realized that it was also helping me just use language to try to understand what was going on, right? And so these postings became part practical and part like sometimes little essays where I was just wondering on the page or in the computer what was going on with me, right? And then after my discharge from the first surgery, I was just kind of turning words in my head, and that is when I think I started writing the first poems, because I had these expressions like heart failure and what does that mean, and thinking about them over and over, and that is how this more lyrical voice came out. So I'm going to write one of those first poems that is called Failing Heart, and it was dedicated to Amy Jones. When your heart breaks, you might hear a rumor of rising foam ascending up your chest, or a pressure on top of your stomach. You might feel that the air has gotten thinner, hard to grasp. You might wonder what comes next. Nobody knows what broke my heart, but we all know there is enough heartache to go around. And I am one of the fortunate ones. They patched me up, but sadly looking said, yes, you're alive, but your heart failed. We don't know what kind of life you can live with a heart that failed. I am one of the fortunate ones. My heart, all patched, all scarred, too big, too weak, too fast, has gotten so much love and so much care. My heart is failing, so they say, but I am here, still fighting heartache away. So in this poem, when I think about it, there is the issue of this expression, failing hard, that I never thought about before. And I was thinking about this, is that connected to failing, and how is it that my heart is failing? What does that mean for my heart? And then all these words that they use to describe it, like the heart is too fast or the heart is too big. What does that mean, right? And so, and also this trying to explain these symptoms, like these noises that literally were coming out of my body and that I couldn't explain, and it would sound like water. And so this idea of the rising foam. So I think that after thinking of those things, one of the things that I want to think and develop today is this idea of the fact that we are illness estranged us from things, and I'm using this weird word like as a translation of the Russian Australiani, as an aesthetic device, as the fact that we are able to produce art when we see things differently, right? When we are alien to our normal lives, right? Another poem that I want to share also has to do with the strangeness of this idea of having pumps. I didn't know what the material of these things were but it was inorganic matter within my body that was connected to the exteriors, to some tubes that went through my heart and through my belly out to some machines that I had to carry with me and charge, right? So it was a very peculiar experience, and I wrote this poem. Tin heart, tin, plastic, metal, something that is not made of who I am, DNA and memories set in motion by a heartbeat. The gods of technology granted me a second life. A tin heart pumps the life that animates my body, my DNA, my memories. But when I rest my hand on my chest, searching for my heartbeat, the rhythm that used to be the soundtrack of my human life, the only thing I feel is the flat humming noise of a refrigerator. Because one of the things that happen with the ventricular assist devices is that the flow of blood is constant and there is not a heartbeat, right? And so it's a more than right? And finally, I want to read a poem that I dedicated to my donor. And so, and I didn't know this, but apparently February 14 is also the day for heart donation. For me, it was just, again, the estrangement of thinking that somebody had given me their heart, their real heart, and not just a little cute card or a piece of chocolate, right? So, Valentine, February 14, and in my chest beating a new heart. The call came on a foggy January day, and on my way to the hospital, I thought of you, my heart. I thought of the life of the one who came and offered me a heart. I thought of the one who loved you, and in the midst of the most terrible loss, in the midst of a grief I don't know how to think, someone hurting was giving me, at that very moment, a heart. I thought of the promise of a long life. I thought of the short life whose heart now lives inside me. I carry you with me, a part of me, like a child, like a bird, being one and being two. My heart, your heart beats, and your life has given me a new life. I think of you, Valentine, and I honor you with every heartbeat, my heart. So now I am going to share with you PowerPoint. Can you go to the, well, I can describe this, all the All the slides have the same background, which has different shades of blue and a few old bottles like you would see in old pharmacies. Right? And I want to start with a quote from a friend of mine who is a Scottish writer who suffers from MS. And curiously, she writes fiction, not poetry. And what she does is really interesting because um, she's writing this novel from the point of view of an object, because what she says is that when she was sick, she felt that that people were doing things to her or talking about her, and that she was not considered she didn't feel like she was treated like a person. So she talks about writing like this opportunity to acquire a voice and use that voice to express your subjectivity. And she writes from the point of view of a book, like a literal book that is left on a drawer. So and in one of her essays, so she helped me see the idea of translated illness into words as a way of reclaiming one's subjectivity. And this is her quote: "As I write, I become not the object of a medical procedure, but a subject equipped to interrogate such experiences by means of storytelling." Right? So what she does is this storytelling, but what I realized about myself was that at the beginning I was using the blog to kind of tell my story, and I think that for me it was very important to tell my story in my own words. So one of the things that I realized early on was that I didn't want coworkers or friends or people I knew to speculate about what I had disappeared from the world, but I wanted to be able to say what I knew and ask about what I didn't understand, and just wonder out loud um, in a way that it was not just somebody saying what was happening to me, but controlling the narrative myself, right? And so I think that the blog had that purpose. And on the other hand, the poems were this form of elaborating on kind of the stranger things, on the words, and on that sense of um, I cannot say this in just normal sentences. I need to try to figure it out some other ways. But I think that also for me it was interesting that I needed to use the written words in other ways. Like when I was intubated, I asked in writing for an acrylic board and markers to be able to to say things, because everybody would come and they would kind of talk about me, and I wanted to be able to say what I actually felt that I needed. So I think that writing can do many things, and if writing is not your thing, I think that we could also look for other things, right? Images, painting, photographs, dance. We can find other ways of doing something with what is happening to us, right? So if you can go to the next slide, please. Thanks, Jesse. And so after reading a lot and going through my own writings and other people's writings, I arrived at this idea that illness is an aesthetic experience. Aesthetic not because it's pretty, but because it's something that we perceive through our senses, right? Aesthetic in that sense um, of the origin of the word, right? Where that has to do with those sensations, right? And it's interesting of thinking of this duality of anesthesia anesthesia, uh, be without sensations. We sometimes need to be without sensation because the sensation is too strong and can be annihilating, right? Um, but but also suffering can make us see things in other ways, feel things in other ways, hear things, smell things, feel pain or feel burn or feel some other things. And trying to deal with that might be a way of responding and grabbing that experience for ourselves, right? Can we go to the next? Something that I identify both in my poetry and other people's were um, different ways in which these things surfaced in this poetry. One of them was these symptoms as aesthetic awakening, right? The things that hurt or the things that we hear or noises our body might make or the lights, where the light is affecting us, um, is a way of making us feel more and sometimes in very negative ways. But perhaps we can do something with that, right? The other one was diagnosis as a cognitive trigger. The idea that just the fact that somebody names our illness makes us try to understand and try to think of a thousand different things. What does that mean, right? And and one of the so in one of the previous sessions, I think we were precisely um, discussing diagnosis, right? And for me, diagnosis could do different things. Like for example, on the one hand, it can. I think we're going to do that a little bit later. The diagnosis you can be shocked, you can be relieved that finally somebody's giving a name to things that you have been feeling. It can make you scared for the future, etc. Right? And then the other aspect was this linguistic estrangement produced by medical terminology and or by the embodied estrangements produced by the medical environment, right? So in my case, for example, um, the the symptom as aesthetic awakening, you can identify in that idea of the foam racing up my chest. The diagnosis as cognitive trigger, this idea of heart failure, right? And the same with the medical terminology, or the body embodied estrangement, the fact that I didn't have a heartbeat anymore, right? So all these things I find in my poetry, but I also find them in other poets. So if we can move to the next slide. And this is one of my favorites regarding diagnosis. This is by Charles Entrekin, a poet that has written on many other things, but this particular book had to do with, it's in The Art of Healing that he published with his wife, who is also a poet, Gail Rudd Entrekin, and about his experience with prostate cancer, I believe. What is Like by Charles Entrekin to Dr. Bill Newson. The shock of being struck, blindsided, as they say, in the middle of a discussion about wakefulness with my son and his wife, when the Asian girl runs a red light, hits us at speed just as we are making a left turn for the freeway home, changes everything. That's what it's like. That piece of bad news, the word coming at me out of nowhere. The kind doctor's lips still moving, lymphoma, the surprise of it, knocking me, of course. I get out of the car, see the girl is in shock, want to put my arms around her. Where did I come from? She stammers. My name is Shi Yilin. There are no easy answers. She keeps touching her knee. She's a pretty girl with a lovely name. So this image of describing the diagnosis, it was lymphoma, no, as this car accident. I think it's very expressive of, it's not just saying, oh, it's shocking, right? But kind of elaborating of this being struck, you know, and how this hits you and how you're still able to perceive other people and other things happening around while you're still dealing with your own shock. I think it's really interesting. I want to show also another poem from the other perspective, that is a doctor needing to give a diagnosis. So if you can advance, is another one more. We're going to share, oh, I love this one. I'm going to also read this one, that is also from a patient's perspective. This is, if we can go, can you go one up to,
Right.
no, the other direction, yeah, there, sarcoma. Leila Shati has this beautiful book, Deluge, and I was going to limit myself to one example so we have more time for writing, but I want to really read this one. When the doctor says the word sarcoma, I consider how it might be a nice name for a daughter. That good feminine A, the way parents name their children for all sorts of inappropriate things, apples, for instance, or the place where the baby was conceived. And I traced my fingers over the barrow of my belly as he speaks. Flesh distended beneath the blue tissue I wear for a dress. The ideal grief frog throwaway. And he says something about life expectancy, but of course, I expect my life so plain, I thought nothing would ever take it. And while he explains, I cup my palms around my center, as if comforting a child or covering her ears. And okay, so let's go to the other one. We can discuss them later when after we all experiment a lot with trying to write. And this one is from the perspective of a doctor. It was published with the Cancer Poetry Project, edited by Catherine Miller, and is by Dr. David H. Huffman, The Door. The door seems impenetrable. Today is arduous. I have seen patients with cancers of pancreas, gastric, cervix, colon, all unresectable. One person with pancreas cancer fills my conscience, young and dying. Despite his expectations and prayers, I must be realistic, yet not hopeless. Yet hope for what? He doesn't understand why he's 40 and dealing with this beast. For balance, I try to remember the exhilaration of a patient cured. I can only be forthright and compassionate. Why is it so difficult to enter this room? Maybe someday I will be in that bed. I hope if that time comes, my doctor will be as truthful and considerate. But if she hesitates at the door, I will understand. I apologize for the typos. We are going to share the PowerPoint later so you can read all the poems and have the references. Maybe I'll try to look for the typos and resend it. I hope there are not too many. And so now we can move on to the first prompt, where I hope you will feel like trying it for yourself. And if not, you can take a break. And so the first prompt has to do with writing about a diagnosis. Several patients find the need to process the shock of a diagnosis through words. If you or a loved one has ever received a disturbing diagnosis, what was your reaction? Fear, anger, disbelief, relief that the source of your pain has been identified? If you're a healthcare provider who has ever given a tough diagnosis to a patient, what are your thoughts before or after delivering it? If you have not been in either situation, try to put yourself in one of them, patient, loved one, or healthcare provider, and write the ideas that go through your mind in that situation. You can use prose or verse, and of course, any language that you feel comfortable with. In my case, I wrote some things in Spanish, some in English as they came. So whatever language is your language today, writing that. And If nothing is coming immediately to mind, you could use this as a suggestion, as a little template, right? And just write a series of similes. Hearing that you have X, or hearing that you suffer from X is like, and then just a list of those. Or telling someone that they have X, or telling someone that they suffer from X is like, and then just a list of them. And so I think that we were going to give 10 minutes because some people requested an extended time. Is that still okay, Jesse? Yes? Okay. So if you feel more comfortable, you can turn off your camera, or you can leave it on and see if this speaks to you somehow. And also, as Jesse said, this is an interactive thing. We will feel happy if you want to share afterwards, or if you want to share in the chat and write a line or two in the chat, we could also do that. Okay. Well, I think that we can probably come back. I got a little distracted reading some things that people had shared privately. But I think I would love to invite you, if you would like to share some of the things that you've written. I'm going to read one of the some of the lines shared by Kimia here. It's beautiful. Trees know, trees feel, trees fear. The crazy girl comes for a hug again, whispers the old tree at the end of the hospital hall. But the girl never stops. She addresses the corridor on four cold wheels. The tree cries.
Well, it looks like Sylvia has something to share in Spanish, which would
awesome.
be fine.
Hi. I wasn't sure whether to read or not because it's in Spanish. I just read a very brief piece of the poem.
Well, yeah,
Please, there's
fine.
several Spanish speakers in the room, so.
Okay. Habrías deseado que alguien te dijera que eras borderline, mamá. Habría cambiado algo, quiero decir, tu decisión de dejar que la tos te alejara del cuarto. Quiero decir, la nota esa que escribiste, te llevas a los nenes. ¿Pensás que habrías tomado entonces el vaso de agua? ¿Que nos habrías mirado a los dos en la cuna? Oh, I'm sorry. Uno y una en el periplo de mirar. Trato de entender, de ponerle nombres a esta confusión, a este no saber qué eras y si podrías haberme amado. Quisiste poner tu mano sobre mi pecho, anticipar la pluralidad de voces tuyas que busco todavía. La música puede estar moviéndose aún, puede haber un agua que mueva las rocas en ella. La certidumbre es un remedio raro de obtener. Yo voy, yo toco la alfombra, te lo juro, yo me uno al lecho, yo leo tus notas en un libro de Darío. Tu pedido tan radical y profano, porque eras el abandono, ámame entera, cosmopolita, subrayaste a los 16 años. ¿A quién se lo pedías? He buscado en las raíces de mis dedos la tierra que sí pudiste levantar, una canción de los Beatles como te cantó Rafa. En el interior de una botella debe haber una nota que dice: Silvia, no te preocupes, siempre me voy a quedar. Silvia, está en este sonido, en esta literación, dijera Darío. I'm sorry.
Wow, that was beautiful. So Silvia is an amazing poet. She's from Uruguay and lives in Chicago, and is she's, I think, one of the most important Latina poets in Chicago right now. So it's an honor that you're here, Silvia, and that was so beautiful.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I see Anna has posted a little bit in the chat. Margarita, do you mind reading that out in case people can't see it?
Yeah. An old wise woman whispers, cuando el corazón se quiebra, entra la luz. A teenager asks, ¿las emociones son las mismas? ¿Dónde queda la memoria de los primeros latidos? ¿Cómo se reconstruye un cuerpo desde lo plural? The practical person inside says, I wish I could release my broken heart and get a new one. That's beautiful too. Thank you, Anna. Let's move on to the next poem so we can do a new prompt. This poem is from a beautiful book called Matrix Lux by Lila Semborain, an Argentinian writer from New York. I think that this one is one of those poems that I think that breaks down both, in this case, a medical term and a medical process, right? But I think what she does for me was kind of so revealing, right? Transfusion. Two bloods that fuse and clarify the prodigy to be another in the blood of another. Transfusion. Translucent fusion with an anonymous body. And so here, just kind of breaking down that word of something that, you say blood transfusion and you can say that easily, but when you really think of that, getting together with someone else, getting your blood together with another blood, right? And so perhaps we can jump to the next prompt because I know time is. So the second prompt I called medical estrangement, and it's some of the examples that I have given you. Think of an expression used in a medical context that makes you reflect about either the meaning of the word, the kinds of metaphors used inside or outside medical discourse, or even the etymology of a word. Some examples are organ failure, battling with disease, the results are negative, diagnosis, etc. Try to deconstruct the meanings either by using them metaphorically, if they are literal, or literally, if they are metaphorical, or by thinking of the etymology of the word or of how you apply those expressions in different contexts. And so perhaps we should cut it a little bit shorter this time. 8 minutes? Okay. Okay, so 8 minutes and then we reconvene. So I hope that, we have little time, but I hope that this serve as, things that you can keep working on later. And so I hope that, okay, I would like to hear from more of you.
I agree.
Yeah. So I have an idea. How about I'm going to read one more poem and the third prompt, but we are not going to have time to write on that. And then we'll just open for discussion and you can read us what you wrote or just talk about the things that we've discussed without necessarily sharing what you wrote if you don't feel like it. Okay. So can we go first to the last slide? Yeah. So the first prompt has to do with dysmorphia, this separation of the image that you have from your body, right? And so cognitively acknowledging that your body is suffering from severe or life-threatening deterioration can sometimes result in a sort of dysmorphia, a separation of body and mind. And often poets going through illness try to reframe the sense of self in their poems. So you can write something addressing your illness or a part of your body, and what would you say doing this? So and then if we can go up to I think it's slide 13. It's another poem by Leila Chati. And I think it's looking at a painting, right? Landscape with Bleeding Woman, after Simon Jordan's Christ Healing the Bleeding Woman. The clouds batting overhead like a gauze swaddled seam, dirty cotton, I see nothing as it is anymore. Since remembering my body as temporary, I impose it anywhere it fits. Could the trees be trees, or are they stitches soldering mud to heaven? In a landscape, I consider first what interests me, the living beings, which I identify as those that bleed. There, interrupting the skin of a field, sheep and shadow, and one woman on her knees, I won't be the last to look into a painting like a mirror, to ignore the cluttered world in order to better scrutinize the self. Is that me crouched at the feet of a god? Of course it's not. But say it was, and touch, he turns away from me. So this idea of mirrors, of looking at your body from the outside, or of looking at something else as if it were your body, are things that can also be worked. And so we are going to share this, and you can perhaps work later with those prompts. But right now, in the few minutes, so we're already at the original time, but we had decided to extend it until 4:30. If you need to leave, of course, do so. But if not, it will be great if we could just talk a little bit about all this, or if you could um, share something that you wrote, would be wonderful. But if you don't feel like doing that, if you can share other reactions to what we have done, I would be very grateful to hear from you. So I'm going to read Yari's comment here in the chat. Some years ago, I suffered a serious hand injury making breakfast. I cut my left thumb separating crumpets with a knife that found instead what it was meant for, not little round circles of gummy bread. That moment, that day, and the diagnosis, severe nerve, severe muscle, tendon, fine, still feels like an acceleration. The day I had to suddenly open my eyes to the place I'd been living in as if it were a tourist rather than an immigrant who didn't know what to dial. It's not 911, where to go. It's not your corner GP, or how vulnerable you are when you are hurt, anonymous, and you don't have someone to speak up for you. And then one from Andrea, from the prompt 2 reflections. When medical records say tendency towards non-compliance, what does that mean? Non-compliant to what? Is it to getting better, the doctor's official meaning, or to the authority of the doctor, the socio-political view, or to becoming an object having to let go of subjectivity, the humanist view? That's really interesting, just kind of deconstructing this compliance, right? From Megan Kyle to everyone, subcutaneous, subcutis, under skin, surface, below the skin, cutis, cute, under her cute skin, the subcute needle. Well, that's great. That's awesome.
And Anna had to leave, but she left something, so I can read that out. COVID-19 in our territories, counterintuitive presence, separating our communities, setting new rules, setting us apart, vaccines, immune response, RNA, something external to us, just like colonization is and was. A virus can be death. Was it ever alive? People do not believe anything anymore. Gypsy people in Brazil rejecting the vaccine. For them, science is not enough. Our communities are breaking inside, old ones becoming ancestors without finishing their work on Earth. May Pachamama, Aksum, Jamanja bond our estranged bodies us back again.
Un diagnóstico de cáncer es mi cuerpo el que se levanta en mí contra. ¿Cómo podría hacerle frente? ¿Quién será mi fuerza, la que pueda enfrentarse a mí? So a cancer diagnosis is my body that races against me. How can I confront it? Who would be my strength? Who could confront me?
And we can also open things up more broadly if people want to comment on any of the things we've talked about, or maybe if people have questions for Margarita.
Yeah, or commenting on the poem. Yeah, it's Laura.
Sorry, I couldn't find the hand raise.
Oh,
and I wouldn't mind sharing a little something. Sorry, I'm looking away, but my big screen is here. I wrote a little something in response to the terminology one, and it's very rough. I'm just working on it, but I don't mind sharing it if people want to hear it.
That'd be great.
Okay. And the title is Asthma. The doctors say bronchioles, air passages linking trachea to lungs. They say twitchy, hyperactive, easily set to spasm. But I hear broncos, horses, half tamed, wild, because it helps me love them, my mustangs, primed to spook or shy, a sideways leap, an instinct for flight.
Wow,
Thanks, Laura.
it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Or if you want to comment in any of the poems we shared too. Yeah, Silvia.
I wanted to add something to Laura. It is interesting because I was also writing about asthma in my last poem because I have asthma since I was 18 months. I am much better now, but as I realized, I had never looked for the term asthma in all these years. This is the first time. And as I was looking for it, it comes from Greek and it means something like a divine. Hippocrates thought it was like a divine visit, so it is very interesting. Like, yeah, it talks about a jadeo, like a special kind of bread. I don't know how to translate that in English. And Hippocrates thought it was like a divine visit, but it really made me think that how come I have never looked the term. So this way we relate also to what we have, no, the illnesses or the pains or our relation to our body sometimes. Yeah, this process of thinking or relating with to language in a different way, it has been revealing to me, at least here. Thank you.
And empowering too.
Yes.
To shift the narrative, you know?
Yeah, I really like the idea of asthma as the broncos, the horses. Perhaps I can read another one. Just
Yeah, why don't we read one more to close things out?
yeah, it's on slide 14.
Yeah, 1 second.
And so this one is collected in the Cancer Poetry Project, edited by Catherine Miller, and is written by Terry Hansen. And it's Farewell to the Hair. I was thinking in the other one, but perhaps we can read too. This one is also very beautiful. I stood outside on a windy day and ran my fingers through my hair. Long strands of silky threads blew across the lawn. They glisten in the sun. Too many to count. I imagine a nest lined with my mane, woven by a mama bird, the babies nestle snug inside, warmed by my fallen tresses. Now, on the wintry nights, when my head is cold, I pull my wool cap over my ears and smile as I dream of baby birds sleeping in my hair. So, so Laura, I think that this is like changing the narrative, right? Because this loss of the hair that is one of the most kind of visible signs of somebody who has been through chemotherapy and is very destructive and poisonous to the body, is turned into this image of giving life, you know, and contributing to the life in the animal kingdom, right? This image of, and so this stranging from the body, this dysmorphia, instead of being something negative, is turned into something beautiful. And something similar happens in the poem that is previous to this one. I Enter the Room Naked by Nancy Louise Peterson. Finally brought the full-length mirror to see my back, shoulder blade to heel, to see my front, ankle to stitched chest, trying to remember how they looked, those nipples, up to my hair that will be gone too in a few weeks. And I paid closer attention to the crease in the back of my leg I hadn't noticed before, the angle of the curve in my back, the mole at the top of my thigh, the wisp of hair around my lips. I raised the jar to the flat of my head and walked across the hardwood floor, full of grace. I caught a glimpse of the swan, her neck movement, a glimpse of the lioness, her shoulder muscle, a glimpse of this ancient one, her padded feet, and I love her. So here we see the kind of destruction of the body in a sense, you know, having lose the breast, being about to lose the hair, having this big scar, and however kind of discovering these beautiful parts of the body and loving this body still, right? So I hope this gives you some ideas. I think people are being a little bit shy today. But it's been a pleasure for me, and I hope that it was productive for you. And see some of you next time too.
Thank you so much, Margarita. And I agree that I hope that you all can maybe take these prompts and continue to work with them if you found them to be productive. I wanted to post again the link to Margarita's book, which is really, really great and demonstrates these same kinds of techniques. And I think you'll enjoy reading it. And I also wanted to mention that the next Healing Arts event is going to take place on Thursday, March 18th at the same time, and it's going to be featuring Marina Tsaplina, who is an interdisciplinary performance artist whose puppetry work engages with bioethics and medical education and the embodied experience of illness. So that's going to be really cool. And I'll also post a link to where you can register for that, although I'll also send it out via email. And finally, if anyone who's here is interested in running a workshop like this one, where you share a little bit about your own work and provide some prompts for us to try out together, please let me know. You needn't have a book out or anything like that. It's really just a chance for us to kind of come together around these shared interests and try some things out together. So I definitely encourage you to do that. So thank you so much, everybody, and I hope to see you next month.
Thanks so much for having me.